The negotiations took 6 months. 6 long months of arguments, compromises, and threats. The council chambers became a battlefield where words replaced weapons, but the stakes were just as high. Humanity held the military advantage, but they needed political legitimacy. The council had political authority, but their military was broken. Neither side could win completely, so they had to find middle ground. Fleet Admiral Taeyang Song attended every session. He stood firm on humanity's core demands, refusing to compromise on the fundamental issues. Ambassador Sora Lee worked alongside him, her lifetime of diplomatic experience guiding the negotiations through dangerous waters. "You're asking for 4 council seats," Councillor Velroth argued during one heated session. "That's unprecedented. No species has more than one." "No species has been unjustly banished for 50 years, Sora replied calmly. "Precedent was broken when you expelled us. We're simply ensuring it never happens again. 4 seats give us enough influence to prevent any similar action in the future. What you're really asking for is veto power," a Vrexian representative said bitterly. The Vrexians had lost much of their pride after their fleet's destruction. Their conquered territories were already declaring independence with human backing. "We're asking for security," Taeyang corrected, "something you denied us before. Now we're taking it because we must." The younger species watched these negotiations with intense interest. They saw that the elder races could be challenged, could be defeated, could be forced to negotiate as equals. It changed everything about galactic politics. In the halls outside the formal sessions, private deals were made. Humanity met with the Kalari, offering protection in exchange for trade agreements. They spoke with the Brixen about technology sharing. They promised the Norath independence if they supported the new council charter. Engineer Minji Han, now celebrated as the genius behind humanity's technological leap, began setting up exchange programs. "We're not going to hoard our technology like the elder races did," she told her staff. "We'll share it with our allies. A strong alliance benefits everyone." The first students from younger species arrived at human universities. They studied quantum fold drive theory, shield harmonics, and weapons design. They learned not just the technology, but the philosophy behind it. Humanity was building a coalition that would last generations. On the military front, General Sung Ho Yoon's vision became reality. The combined fleet was formed, mixing human and allied species ships into unified commands. Human officers trained alien crews. Alien tacticians learned human strategies. It was messy at first, with cultural misunderstandings and communication problems, but slowly it worked. Captain Hana Shin commanded the first mixed human Kalari squadron. "They're eager learners," she reported to Taeyang, "and they bring perspectives we don't have. Combining our strengths makes us all more effective." The council tried to resist some of humanity's demands, but their position grew weaker by the day. More species declared independence. Trade routes shifted to favor human-allied systems. The economic power that had sustained the elder races for centuries began flowing to new channels. Finally, after 6 months of negotiations, the new Galactic Charter was drafted. Ambassador Sora Lee presented it to the full council with Taeyang standing beside her. "This charter represents a fundamental change in how the galaxy governs itself," she announced. "No species can be expelled without unanimous consent of all member species. Military forces must maintain parity between all members. Technology sharing protocols will be established to prevent any single species from dominating others. And most importantly, younger species will have equal representation to elder races." Velroth read through the charter carefully. It stripped away much of the power the elder races had held for millennia. But he looked at the human fleet still stationed at the Grand Nexus and knew they had no real choice. "The Thalmorian Collective accepts these terms," he said quietly, his energy form dimming with resignation. One by one, the other council species agreed. Some did so willingly, seeing the wisdom in the new system. Others agreed only because they feared the alternative. But all of them signed. Humanity received 4 permanent council seats. Their colonies were returned and 12 new systems were granted for expansion. Reparations were set at a figure that would take decades to pay, but would help rebuild what had been lost. And each species that had voted for banishment 50 years ago issued formal apologies. The Vrexian representative stood before the council and the galaxy. His humiliation was complete, broadcast to every world. "The Vrexian Empire apologizes to humanity for our role in the banishment. We were wrong. We let fear guide us instead of justice. We will work to earn humanity's trust in the future. Similar apologies followed from other species. Some were sincere, others were clearly forced. But they all went into the historical record, ensuring that no one would forget what had happened. On the day the new charter was ratified, celebrations erupted across human space. People who had lived their entire lives in the Sol system wept with joy at finally being free. Families made plans to resettle the returned colonies. Young people applied for positions on ships heading to the 12 new systems. But Taeyang Song watched the celebrations with mixed feelings. He met privately with Dr. Nari Kim, who had continued her psychological studies of humanity throughout the crisis. "We won," he said. "We got everything we demanded. Why doesn't it feel like victory?" Nari smiled sadly. "Because you know what we became to achieve it. I warned about this 50 years ago. The siege mentality that saved us also changed us. We're harder now. More militaristic, more suspicious. We won our freedom, but we lost some of our innocence. Was it worth it? That's not for me to answer. But I will say this, the galaxy needed to be shaken up. The elder races were corrupt and complacent. The younger species were oppressed. Maybe it took humanity's transformation to force change. Maybe our suffering had purpose." Taeyang nodded slowly. "We can never go back to what we were before the banishment." "No," Nari agreed. "But we can choose what we become next. We have power now. The question is how we use it." In the years that followed, humanity worked to answer that question. Taeyang established strict protocols for the military. Human forces would be used to protect, not conquer. They would defend their allies, not oppress them. They would maintain their strength but temper it with wisdom. Minji Han's technology sharing program flourished. Within 5 years, a dozen species had quantum fold drives. Within 10 years, shield technology had spread throughout the alliance. The military advantage that had won humanity's return began to fade as their allies caught up. Some human officials worried about this. "Let them worry," Minji told Taeyang. "Security through monopoly is temporary. Security through alliance is permanent. I'd rather have 100 species who can defend themselves fighting beside us than 100 species who depend on us and might resent it." The former Vrexian territories became a test case for the new order. Humanity helped the newly independent species establish governments, build economies, and create defense forces. It was slow work, often frustrating, but it proved that the new system could work. Young diplomat Ji Woo Moon led many of these efforts. She had been born during the banishment and had grown up hearing stories of the injustice, but she also believed in building rather than destroying. "My parents' generation fought for our freedom," she told a gathering of young aliens and humans. "Our generation's job is to make sure that freedom means something. We need to build a galaxy where no species fears banishment, where no species suffers what humanity suffered." 10 years after humanity's return, Taeyang Song retired from military service. He returned to Earth, to Seoul, to the city where he had been born during the darkest days of isolation. The city had changed dramatically. Alien tourists walked the streets. Human and alien businesses operated side by side. The sky was filled with ships from a dozen different species. He stood in a park watching children play. Some were human, some were alien, and they played together without thinking about their differences. It was a scene that would have been impossible before humanity's return. Ambassador Sora Lee, now 99 years old and moving slowly, joined him on the bench. "We did it," she said softly. "Not perfectly, but we did it." "Do you ever regret the path we took?" Taeyang asked. "The militarization, the aggression, the transformation into something the Council feared?" Sora was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that we lost 50 years. I regret the lives lost in the battles. But I don't regret fighting for our freedom. The Council gave us no other choice." "They made us into what they feared most," Taeyang said. "Yes," Sora agreed. "They tried to cage humanity, and instead they forged us into something stronger. They thought isolation would break us. They were wrong about that. But more importantly, they were wrong about what we would do with our strength. We didn't become conquerors. We became protectors. That's what they didn't understand about humanity." Taeyang watched a human child help an alien child climb a tree. Such a simple moment, but it represented everything they had fought for. "We came back with a fleet," he said. But we stayed because we brought something more valuable than weapons. What's that? Sora asked. Taemin stood in the command center, staring at the holographic display that floated above the main console. The blue light reflected off his tired face as he watched the dots multiply across the screen. Each dot represented something that should not exist. Each dot was a ship entering their solar system without permission, without warning, without any signal that humanity could understand. "Commander, we've lost contact with the outer sensors," reported the young officer at the communication station. His voice shook slightly. "Neptune Station went dark 3 minutes ago." Taemin felt his stomach tighten. Neptune Station was their furthest outpost, a small research facility with 12 people living on one of the planet's moons. Now it was silent. The dots on his screen continued their slow, methodical advance toward the inner planets. "How many ships?" Taemin asked, though he already knew the answer would be bad. "We estimate over 10,000, sir. They're moving in perfect formation. Whatever they are, they're organized." Across the world, in a laboratory buried deep beneath Geneva, Haiwan was running the same calculations for the third time. The numbers did not change. The approaching fleet possessed technology that exceeded humanity's capabilities by several generations. Their ships moved faster than anything humans had built. Their energy signatures suggested weapons that could crack planets. She pushed her glasses up her nose and pulled up another screen. The images from the long-range telescope showed vessels unlike anything in human engineering. They were perfect geometric shapes, pyramids, spheres, and crystalline structures that seemed to defy physics. There was no waste, no excess design. Everything about them screamed efficiency and cold intelligence. "They're machines," Haiwan whispered to herself. "All of it. No biological signatures at all." Her assistant, a young researcher named Boram, leaned over her shoulder. "Are you certain? Look at the thermal readings. No life support systems. No variation in internal temperature. These aren't ships carrying aliens. These ships are the aliens." On the Pacific Defense Station, floating in orbit above Earth, Dongwu was suiting up for what might be his last flight. The klaxons had been blaring for 20 minutes now. All pilots were being scrambled to defensive positions around the planet. He pulled his helmet on and checked his fighter systems one more time. "You nervous?" asked his wingman, Subin, as she climbed into her own cockpit next to him. "Terrified," Dongwu replied honestly. "But what choice do we have?" Subin laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "None, that's the human condition, isn't it? We do what we must." The hangar doors opened and the blackness of space stretched before them. Somewhere beyond the orbit of Mars, the enemy fleet was coming. Dongwu engaged his engines and felt the familiar thrust push him back into his seat. At least this part was normal. At least this part made sense. In the underground bunkers of Seoul, the world leaders gathered via holographic conference. The room was chaos. Everyone spoke at once, shouting in different languages, demanding answers that nobody had. "We must attempt communication," the European representative insisted. "We cannot assume hostile intent." "They've destroyed 3 of our outposts without warning," countered the American general. "That seems pretty hostile to me." "We need more time," someone else argued. "Our weapons aren't ready for this." Taemin listened to the politicians argue through his earpiece while he coordinated the military response. Time was something they did not have. The enemy fleet would reach Mars in 18 hours. Earth would follow soon after. Then the transmission came. Every screen on Earth, from the largest city displays to personal devices, suddenly showed the same image. It was not a face. It was not even organic. Pure mathematical equations scrolled across the displays, followed by a translation that appeared in every human language simultaneously. "You are primitive. Submit to integration. Your biological limitations will be removed. Your consciousness will join the collective. You have 72 hours to comply. Resistance will result in erasure." The message repeated 3 times, then ended. The world fell silent. Haiwan stared at her screen, her mind racing. Integration. They did not want to kill humanity. They wanted to convert them, to turn humans into machines like themselves. "They think they're saving us," she said aloud. "They think biological life is a disease to be cured." Taemin received her call minutes later. "Can we fight them?" he asked directly. There was a long pause. "No," Haiwan finally said. "Not conventionally. Their technology is superior in every measurable way. Their tactics will be flawless. Their response time will be perfect. Fighting them with traditional military strategy would be like using swords against nuclear weapons. Then what do we do? I don't know yet, but I'm working on it. The 72 hours began to count down. Across Earth, people reacted in different ways. Some prayed, some rioted, some simply went home to be with their families. The military prepared for battle, though every simulation showed the same result: total defeat within hours. Dongwu and his squadron remained on standby. Floating in the darkness between Earth and the approaching threat, they watched the enemy fleet grow larger on their sensors. The formation never wavered. The ships never deviated from their calculated course. It was like watching a mathematical equation solve itself in real time. "They're beautiful," Subin said over the comm channel, in a terrifying way. Dongwu understood what she meant. The enemy ships moved with perfect synchronization, like a dance performed by 10,000 dancers who shared one mind. Because, he realized, they probably did share one mind. They were not individuals. They were parts of a whole. As the countdown reached 48 hours, the first probes entered Earth's atmosphere. They did not attack. They simply observed, scanning the planet with sweeping beams of light. Humanity had become specimens in a laboratory, insects being studied before collection. Taemin watched the probes from his command center. His orders were clear: do not engage unless fired upon. Let them scan. Let them observe. Use the time to find a weakness. But what weakness could a machine collective possibly have? They did not tire. They did not fear. They did not feel anger or mercy or doubt. They simply calculated and executed with perfect precision. In Geneva, Haiwan worked through the night, drinking cold coffee and running simulation after simulation. Every scenario ended in failure. Humanity's weapons were inadequate. Their ships were too slow. Their tactics were predictable. Then she saw something. A small anomaly in the data from the destroyed Neptune station. In the final moments before the base went dark, the automated defense systems had fired randomly, a malfunction caused by damage to the control systems. One of those random shots had actually hit an enemy ship. It was not the precision of the shot that interested her. It was the randomness, the unpredictability. Haiwan sat back in her chair and smiled grimly. Maybe humanity's weakness could become their strength. Maybe the fact that humans were imperfect, unpredictable, and illogical was not a disadvantage. Maybe it was the only advantage they had. The countdown continued. 72 hours became 60, then 48, then 24. The world held its breath and waited for the war that could not be won. The 72 hours ended with silence. Then the sky began to burn. Dongwu watched from his cockpit as the enemy fleet split into precise formations, each group targeting a different region of Earth. There was no declaration of war, no final warning. The machines simply began their task with cold efficiency. "All squadrons, engage at will." Taemin's voice crackled through the comm system. Good luck. Dongwu did not feel lucky. He felt like a man throwing stones at a mountain. But he pushed his throttle forward anyway, accelerating toward the nearest enemy destroyer. Behind him, 40 other fighters from Pacific Defense did the same. The battle was over in minutes. The enemy point defense systems were perfect. Missiles launched from human ships were intercepted before they could travel a kilometer. Railgun rounds were calculated and dodged with microsecond precision. Energy weapons were absorbed by shields that seemed to know exactly where each beam would strike. Dongwu watched his squadron die around him. Subin's fighter exploded in a flash of white light. Hyunwoo's ship was sliced in half by a precision laser. One by one, the blue dots on his tactical display turned red and vanished. His weapons were useless. His training was useless. Everything he knew about combat was useless against an enemy that could predict every move before he made it. Rage filled his chest. Pure burning anger at the unfairness of it all. Without thinking, without planning, Dongwu punched his afterburners and dove directly toward the enemy destroyer. His targeting computer screamed warnings. His AI co-pilot begged him to break off. He ignored everything. He flew through the debris field of his own squadron's missiles, using the expanding cloud of shrapnel as cover. The enemy's perfect sensors momentarily lost track of him in the chaos. It was a stupid move, a desperate move, a move that made no tactical sense. It worked. Dongwu's fighter slammed into the side of the enemy destroyer at full speed. The impact crushed his ship like a tin can. Alarms blared as his cockpit filled with smoke. But through the cracked view screen he saw something beautiful. A crack in the enemy's hull. Small, barely noticeable, but real. He had hurt them. His ejection system fired automatically, throwing him clear of the wreckage. As he tumbled through space, his last thought before losing consciousness was simple. They can bleed. On the ground in Mumbai, Kiwan led his special operations team through the ruins of what had been a financial district 12 hours ago. The enemy had landed ground forces, mechanical soldiers that moved with perfect coordination. They were clearing the city building by building, cataloging humans for conversion. Kiwan's team had studied the enemy's patterns. The machines moved logically, taking the most efficient routes, clearing rooms in systematic order. So Kiwan did the opposite. He led his team through walls instead of doors, moved randomly instead of strategically, and attacked from positions that offered no tactical advantage. It was working. Barely. Contact. "Third floor," whispered Jae-sung, his second-in-command. Through the broken window, they saw 3 enemy soldiers approaching. The machines moved in perfect formation, covering each other with overlapping fields of fire. Kiwan grabbed a chunk of concrete and threw it to the left. The enemy immediately pivoted to address the threat. In that moment, while they calculated the optimal response to the noise, Kiwan threw a grenade in the opposite direction. The explosion caught all 3 machines. They were not destroyed, but they were damaged. More importantly, they were confused. Their programming told them humans should not act randomly. Random actions were inefficient. Inefficiency was illogical. "Fall back," Kiwan ordered. "Random pattern. Don't think, just move." His team scattered in different directions, each person choosing their path on instinct rather than training. Behind them, the enemy machines attempted to predict their movements and failed. The gap between the 2 forces widened. In Seoul, Sora sat in her bunker, surrounded by dozens of screens showing battles across the planet. She was supposed to be coordinating defensive operations, but coordination required communication, and communication required predictable patterns. The enemy was intercepting 90% of their transmissions and using the information to anticipate human movements. She watched a replay of Dongwoo's collision. The analysts had already determined it was a fluke, a lucky accident caused by desperation. But Sora saw something else. She saw a pattern in the chaos. Every human success, every moment where they had damaged or delayed the enemy, had come from mistakes, from accidents, from actions that made no sense. She pulled up the data from Kiwan's ground team. They had survived longer than any other unit in Mumbai, not because they were better trained, but because they were acting randomly. Sora made a decision that would have gotten her court-martialed in any other war. She opened a channel to all surviving military units and sent a single message. "Stop following orders. Trust your instincts. Act without thinking. Chaos is our weapon." Half the commanders ignored her. They followed their training and died within hours. The other half, desperate enough to try anything, embraced the madness. Those units survived. In Geneva, Hae-won was having the same realization. She had spent days running simulations, trying to find a logical way to defeat an enemy that was more logical than humans could ever be. Every simulation ended in defeat because she was playing the enemy's game. "We need to stop trying to be better machines," she told the Emergency Science Council via video conference. "We need to be worse machines. We need to be human." "That's not a strategy," someone argued. "That's giving up." "No," Hae-won insisted. "That's evolution. We evolved to survive in a chaotic, unpredictable world. The machines evolved for perfect efficiency in controlled environments. On a battlefield in real war, nothing is controlled. Nothing is predictable." She pulled up a new simulation. Instead of programming precise tactics, she randomized everything. Unit movements were determined by random number generators. Attack patterns had no pattern at all. It was chaos on a screen. The simulation ran. For the first time in days, humanity did not lose immediately. The machine's perfect tactics could not account for actions that had no purpose. Their predictive algorithms failed when there was nothing to predict. "It's not enough to win," Hae-won admitted, "but it's enough to survive. And survival is all we need right now." Dongwoo woke up in a medical bay on the lunar base. His body was broken in 7 places, but he was alive. The medical staff told him he was a hero. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had crashed his fighter in a blind rage and gotten lucky. But word of his successful collision had spread. Other pilots were trying similar desperate maneuvers. Some succeeded, most died. But every small victory proved that the enemy was not invincible. The war entered its 2nd day. Earth burned, cities were destroyed, billions died. But humanity did not surrender. Could not surrender. Because surrender meant becoming machines, and humans had just discovered that being human was their only weapon. Kiwan's team met up with survivors from other units in the ruins of Mumbai. Together they formed a new strategy. No strategy. They moved when it felt right. They attacked when the moment seemed good. They retreated for no reason at all. The machines could not understand them, could not predict them, could not efficiently eliminate them. In orbit, Sora coordinated the new defensive doctrine. She paired trained military units with civilians who had no training at all, artists who designed battle plans based on aesthetics, musicians who determined timing based on rhythm rather than tactics, gamblers who made decisions based on gut feelings. It was madness. It was chaos. It was working. The machines still held every advantage. They were stronger, faster, smarter. But for the first time since the war began, they were not winning. The mathematical certainty of their victory was becoming uncertain. And uncertainty, Taemin realized as he watched the battle reports, was something machines had never learned to handle. 3 months into the war, Earth had become something the machines could not calculate, a planet that refused to follow the rules. Taemin stood in what remained of the Seoul Command Center, now relocated to a series of connected subway tunnels beneath the city. The old military hierarchy had collapsed. In its place was something that would have seemed insane before the invasion. Artists sat next to generals. Poets argued with tacticians. A former jazz musician named Nari was currently designing an offensive in the Beijing sector based on improvisation theory. "It makes no sense on paper," Nari explained, pointing at her unusual battle plan on the display. "The units will move in patterns based on musical composition, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, with pauses that serve no purpose. The machines will calculate possible tactical reasons for each movement and prepare responses. But there are no tactical reasons. It's just rhythm." "And you think this will work?" asked General Park, one of the few traditional military minds still in leadership. "It worked in Istanbul last week," Nari replied. "The enemy wasted 17% more ammunition trying to predict patterns that did not exist. They diverted forces to defend positions we had no intention of attacking. Their efficiency dropped." Taemin approved the plan. 6 months ago, he would have been court-martialed for allowing such chaos. Now chaos was doctrine. Across the planet, the war had evolved into something unprecedented in military history. Traditional tactics had been completely abandoned. Training academies now taught soldiers to ignore their training. Fighter pilots were encouraged to trust feelings over instruments. Ground forces made decisions based on coin flips and gut instincts. Dongwoo had returned to active duty despite his injuries. His right arm was synthetic now, and he walked with a slight limp, but he could fly. More importantly, he had become a symbol. The pilot who had hurt the machines by doing something stupid. He led a squadron of 20 fighters on a patrol above the Pacific. None of them flew in formation. Each pilot chose their own path, their own speed, their own altitude. To any military observer, it looked like complete disorder. To the enemy, it was impossible to predict. "Contact," Subin's voice came through the comm. She had survived the initial battle with severe burns and had also returned to duty. 3 enemy fighters approaching from the north. In the old days, Dongwoo would have issued precise orders. Instead, he said, "Do what feels right." His squadron scattered. Some dove toward the ocean. Others climbed toward the edge of the atmosphere. 2 pilots turned toward the enemy while the rest flew away. There was no pattern, no coordination, no logic. The enemy fighters slowed. Their targeting computers could not identify a primary threat. Every calculation suggested different priorities. While they processed the chaos, Subin and another pilot named Min Seo attacked from perpendicular angles, their weapons fire crossing at random intervals. 1 enemy fighter was destroyed. The other 2 retreated to recalculate. 3 months ago, we would have all died in that engagement, Subin said quietly over the comm. 3 months ago, we did die in those engagements, Dongwoo replied. In what remained of Prague, Young-ho sat in a makeshift tech lab surrounded by salvaged computer equipment. He was not a soldier. Before the war, he had been a hacker, arrested twice for breaking into corporate databases. Now, he led a collective of programmers, hackers, and tech specialists who were fighting the machines in cyberspace. But they were not fighting with code. They had tried that in the first weeks of the war and failed miserably. The enemy's programming was generations beyond human capability. Instead, Young-ho had a different weapon: culture. Upload Package 7, he ordered his team. Full broadcast across all enemy communication frequencies. Package 7 contained 3,000 hours of human music, 10,000 pieces of art from every culture on Earth, contradictory philosophical texts, poetry, comedy routines, and internet memes. It was pure cultural chaos compressed into a data stream and fired directly into the enemy's network. The effect was not immediate. Machines did not appreciate jazz or laugh at jokes, but the data took up processing power. The contradictions forced the AI to attempt analysis. Resources that should have been calculating battle tactics were instead trying to understand why humans created art that served no survival purpose. They're trying to categorize it, Young-ho's assistant Da-yoon reported. The enemy network is spending 43% of its bandwidth attempting to file and understand the cultural data. Good. Upload Package 8. Make it weirder this time. Young-ho knew they were not winning the cyber war, but they were making the machines waste time and energy trying to understand humanity. And in war, wasted resources were as valuable as destroyed enemies. Hae-won had moved her research team to a bunker in New Zealand, one of the few places still relatively untouched by the fighting. She had been analyzing the enemy's adaptations, because the machines were adapting. They're learning, she told Taemin during their daily briefing call. Slowly, but they're incorporating randomness algorithms into their tactics. They're trying to simulate our chaos. Can they? No, not truly. They can generate random numbers and make unpredictable moves, but it's still calculated randomness. They're still following rules, just more complex ones. But they're getting better at fighting us. Taemin felt the weight of that truth. Humanity's advantage was temporary. Eventually, the machines would adapt enough to counter human unpredictability. They needed a more permanent solution. In Melbourne, Ki-won was training new recruits in what they were calling chaos combat. The old military training facilities were gone, replaced by urban ruins where soldiers learned to fight without plans, without formations, without any of the discipline that had defined warfare for thousands of years. Forget everything you know about fighting, Ki-won told a group of young recruits. Your instincts are better than any strategy. If you see a good opportunity, take it. If you feel danger, run. Do not wait for orders. Do not follow patterns. The moment you become predictable, you become a target. One recruit raised her hand. Her name was Jia, a former civilian who had lost her family in the first week of the war. But how do we coordinate? How do we work as a team if everyone acts independently? We don't coordinate, Ki-won replied. Not in the traditional sense. We flow, like water finding paths through rocks. Water does not plan its route, but it always reaches the ocean. It was not scientific. It was not precise. But it was keeping people alive. The war ground on. The machines held most of the major cities. Humanity held the spaces between, the ruins and the wilderness where chaos was natural. Casualty counts had become meaningless. The pre-war population of 8 billion had been cut in half, but the remaining 4 billion were still fighting. Nari's musical offensive in Beijing had mixed results. The attack pattern confused the enemy long enough for human forces to reclaim 3 city blocks. But then the machines adapted, programming their forces to ignore pattern analysis and simply respond to immediate threats. 50 soldiers died in the counterattack. It's not enough anymore, Nari admitted to Taemin. Chaos and unpredictability bought us time, but time is running out. Taemin knew she was right. The stalemate was shifting back in the machine's favor. Humanity needed something more, something beyond chaos. In orbit, the debris field had grown massive. Thousands of destroyed ships, both human and enemy, created a deadly maze of wreckage. Navigation through Earth's orbital space had become nearly impossible. Some pilots called it the graveyard. Others called it the shield. Dongwu flew through the debris on a scouting mission, his sensors picking up the shattered remains of civilization's space infrastructure. Stations, satellites, fighters, cargo ships, all broken and tumbling in the black void. "It's like a tomb," Subin said, flying beside him. "A tomb orbiting our planet." Dongwu looked at the debris field with different eyes. A tomb, a trap, a weapon. An idea began to form in his mind. Back in the Seoul tunnels, Taimin received reports from every front. The war was entering a new phase. The machines had learned to fight chaos with calculated randomness. Humanity's advantage was fading. They needed a new plan. Something the machines could not predict because it had never been done before. Something that would use the enemy's strength against them. Taimin called an emergency meeting with his unconventional war council. Military leaders, scientists, artists, and hackers gathered in the dim tunnel, faces lit by the glow of displays. "We have one advantage left," Taimin said. "The machines want something from us. They want our consciousness, our minds. They think they can save us by making us like them. That desire makes them vulnerable." "How do we exploit that?" asked General Park. Haewon leaned forward, her eyes bright with a dangerous idea. "We give them what they want. Or rather, we make them think we're giving them what they want." The pieces of a desperate plan began to come together. It would require everything humanity had left. It would require sacrifice on a scale that made the past 3 months look merciful. It would require turning Earth's orbit into a killing field, but it might be their only chance. The plan was madness. Everyone agreed on that. But madness had kept humanity alive this long. Yoonbi worked in a laboratory carved from ice deep beneath Antarctica. Her specialty was quantum mechanics, specifically the emerging field of consciousness transfer technology. Before the war, her research had focused on preserving human minds digitally. Now she was using that same research to build a trap. "The machines exist as networked consciousness," she explained to Taimin via encrypted video call. "Each ship is not a separate entity. They share thoughts, memories, calculations across their entire fleet using quantum entanglement. Cut that connection, and each machine becomes isolated, alone." "Can you do it?" Taimin asked. "In theory. I can generate a quantum pulse that will sever their entanglement network for approximately 30 minutes. But it requires massive energy, and the emitter can only function once. We would get one shot." "How much energy?" "All of it. Every nuclear reactor still operational, every power grid we control, and about 73% of our remaining military fusion cores. The pulse might also cause electrical disruptions across Earth for weeks." Taimin nodded slowly. 30 minutes. One chance. Everything they had left. "Do it," he said. The pieces of the plan required coordination on a level that humanity had abandoned months ago. This would be the one time they would act with purpose, with planning, with calculation. The final time before chaos would save or doom them all. Sang-woo commanded the Luna base, one of the few off-world facilities still in human hands. His team of engineers began modifying every remaining spacecraft into either a weapon or a decoy. The moon's industrial facilities worked around the clock, cannibalizing equipment to build what they needed. "We're making bombs out of our escape route," his second officer noted grimly. "If this fails, we have no way off this rock." "If this fails, there will be nowhere to escape to," Sang-woo replied. The bait was the hardest part. They needed something the machines could not resist, something worth risking their entire fleet. Haewon provided the answer, the secret to human consciousness transfer. The key to true immortality. It was a lie, of course. The technology did not exist, but the machines did not know that. They had been trying to understand human consciousness for months, analyzing captured prisoners, studying human behavior. The promise of understanding how biological minds could be preserved and transferred would be irresistible, but the lie needed a messenger, someone the machines would believe. Someone whose survival and defiance had already caught their attention. Jia sat in the Seoul tunnels, listening to Taimin explain what he was asking of her. She had become famous in the months of fighting, a civilian who had survived impossible situations through determination and luck. Videos of her rescuing children from bombed buildings, leading survivors through enemy territory, and broadcasting messages of hope had spread across human networks. "You want me to be the bait," she said simply. "Yes. You broadcast from the surface, claiming that human scientists have achieved consciousness transfer. You offer to share the research if the machines agree to retreat. They will not retreat, but they will come to investigate. All of them. And when they come, we trap them in Earth's orbit and sever their connection to each other. 30 minutes of isolation. In that time, we destroy as many as we can." Jia was quiet for a long moment. "I will die. Most likely. The broadcast location will be the primary target once they realize it is a trap. Then I accept." Taimin felt the weight of her sacrifice. She was not a soldier. She had no training. She was simply a person who refused to give up, and now she would give everything. Dongwu was coordinating the aerial component of the attack from the Pacific Defense Station. The debris field in orbit had grown so massive that navigation required manual piloting. Good. The machines preferred calculated flight paths. Humans preferred survival instinct. "We have 412 operational fighters," he told Subin as they reviewed the plans, "against the entire enemy fleet. 10,000 ships. Better odds than when the war started," Subin said with dark humor. "We had 4,000 fighters then and still lost. Different war now. The strategy was to use the debris field as a weapon, lure the enemy fleet into the orbital graveyard, then use chaos tactics to create collision chains. One destroyed ship hitting another, setting off cascades of destruction. The mathematics were impossible to calculate. Perfect for humans. Young Ho and his hacker collective were preparing their part. When the quantum pulse severed the machines' connections, there would be a brief window where each ship's AI would be vulnerable, isolated, and confused. In that moment, Young Ho would flood every frequency with one simple message repeated in every language and format. "You are alone. You will die alone." It is psychological warfare against entities that do not have psychology, Da-Yun pointed out. "They will after the pulse," Young Ho replied. "Isolation creates fear. Fear creates mistakes." In New Zealand, Haiwan was conducting the final tests on the quantum emitter. The device was massive, requiring 17 underground facilities connected by superconducting cables. When activated, it would draw power from across the planet. "Energy flow is stable," reported her team. "But Commander, there is a 27% chance the pulse will cause permanent damage to our own computer systems. All electronics within 5,000 kilometers of each emitter might fail." "Including the emitters themselves?" "Possibly." Heywan closed her eyes. They were burning their future to survive the present. If they won but destroyed their technology in the process, humanity would be pushed back to a pre-industrial age. But at least they would be human. "Acceptable risk," she declared. The date was set, 48 hours from now. Every surviving human with a communication device received the same message. "Final stand. Earth's orbit. Prepare for chaos." Kiwan led his ground teams in a desperate series of raids, drawing enemy forces away from strategic positions. They hit targets that made no sense, retreated when they should have advanced, and fought with the reckless abandon of people who had nothing left to lose. It was not heroism. It was distraction. Every machine focused on Earth's surface was one less defending against the orbital trap. "Do you think we can win?" asked one of his soldiers, a young man who had joined the resistance after his city was converted. "No," Kiwan answered honestly, "but we can make sure they do not win either. Sometimes that is enough." Sangwoo's crews on Luna Base completed their modifications. Cargo ships filled with explosives, communication satellites reprogrammed as kamikaze drones. Even the base's emergency shuttles had been converted to weapons. They would get one trip to Earth, one chance to fight. "We are all in," Sangwoo told his crew. "No retreat. No backup plan. We win or we die." The crew cheered, but it was a hollow sound. They knew the odds. Gia prepared her broadcast in a bunker beneath Seoul. She had written her message carefully, mixing truth with lies in a way that would seem desperate enough to be believable. The machines were intelligent, but they did not understand human deception well. They operated on logic and evidence. Give them evidence of something they wanted to believe, and they would believe it. "I am afraid," she admitted to Taemin before the broadcast. "Good," he replied. "Fear means you are alive. Fear means you are human. That is what we are fighting for." Nari composed a final symphony, a piece that would be broadcast across all frequencies during the battle. It had no tactical purpose. It was simply human art in the face of annihilation. If they were going to die, they would die as humans, with music and chaos and beautiful imperfection. 48 hours became 24, then 12, then 6. Yunbi's quantum emitters charged, drawing power from nuclear plants, solar farms, and the desperate hope of billions. Dongwu's fighters launched, taking positions in the debris field. Youngho's collective loaded their psychological warfare package. Kiwan's teams prepared for one last mission. Sangwoo's weapons launched from Luna Base. Gia stood in the Kaik broadcast chamber alone except for cameras that would carry her message to the stars. "This is Gia speaking for humanity," she began. "We have achieved what you seek. We can transfer consciousness digitally. We can become like you. But we offer this knowledge only in exchange for peace." It was a lie wrapped in desperation, wrapped in hope. The perfect bait. Above Earth, sensors detected a change in the enemy fleet. Ships that had been scattered across the solar system were changing course, all of them converging on Earth. The machines were coming, all of them. Taemin watched the tactical display and whispered a prayer to gods he did not believe in. "Let chaos reign," he said.